Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Do you still remember these stars whose brilliance once lit up the world, only to be extinguished by one of the most devastating forces in their lives, alcohol? In today's video, we will look back at 13 beloved celebrities who lost everything because of the bottle, their careers, their families, their dreams, and ultimately, their lives. These were not ordinary people. They were cultural giants, icons of music, literature, film, and sports. Yet behind the applause, behind the fame, behind the carefully crafted public images, there were storms no one could truly see. Before we begin, let me ask you, do you remember any of them? Do you recall the moment you first heard about their tragic endings? Share your memories in the comments below. Your perspective is part of what keeps their stories alive. Their final days were heartbreaking, their struggles haunting, and their legacies unforgettable. Let's revisit the stories the world can never truly forget. Dylan Thomas's final night was one of the most chilling endings in literary history. In November 1953, after a long day of drinking in New York City, he collapsed in his hotel room at the Chelsea Hotel. Witnesses recalled him boasting, "I've had 18 straight whiskeys. I think that's the record," before his body finally surrendered. He was rushed to St. Vincent's Hospital, slipping in and out of consciousness. Within days, the voice that had mesmerized the world with poetic thunder fell silent forever. The official cause? Bronchopneumonia, made fatal by severe alcohol poisoning. But who was the man behind this tragic fall? Dylan Thomas, born in 1914 in Wales, was one of the most powerful and emotionally explosive poets of the 20th century. His works, "Do Not Go Gentle into That Good Night," and "Death Shall Have No Dominion," echo through generations with raw intensity and unmatched lyrical beauty. His readings attracted crowds like a rock star, and his voice alone became a symbol of literary brilliance. When news of his death spread, the literary world was devastated. Fellow poets mourned the loss of a blazing talent. Fans gathered to read his poems aloud, their voices trembling with disbelief. Even today, scholars still debate how much of his suffering was hidden behind his fame. What do you think about Dylan Thomas's final days? Do you believe his genius and destruction were inseparable? Leave a comment below. Billie Holiday, 1915 to 1959. Her final hours were a heartbreaking collision of brilliance and suffering. In the summer of 1959, Billie Holiday lay dying in a New York hospital room, her body ravaged by alcoholic cirrhosis. She had been admitted for heart and liver failure, but even then, alcohol still shadowed her every breath. Surrounded by police officers who would come to arrest her even on her deathbed, she whispered prayers, fading in and out of consciousness. On July 17th, the voice that had once electrified the world went quiet forever. The medical report was blunt: complications of chronic alcoholism. Billie Holiday, born in 1915, was not just a singer, she was a revolution. Her interpretation of Strange Fruit shook America to its core, exposing racial violence with a haunting clarity no one else dared to deliver. Her phrasing, emotional depth, and raw honesty transformed jazz forever, influencing generations of artists who still try to grasp the magic she carried naturally. The world mourned. Musicians wept openly during performances dedicated to her. Fans, shocked and grieving, gathered outside clubs where she once sang, leaving flowers and handwritten notes. Even critics who once doubted her admitted that her death marked the end of an era. Her life was filled with storms, poverty, abuse, addiction, and persecution, but through it all, her voice remained unforgettable. What do you think, dear viewers? Do you believe Billie's suffering shaped her unmatched emotional power? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Jack Kerouac, 1922 to 1969. Jack Kerouac's final day was a slow-motion collapse, a tragedy unfolding inside a small Florida home far from the roaring highways he once immortalized. On October 20th, 1969,
After years of relentless drinking, he began vomiting blood from a massive internal hemorrhage caused by alcoholic cirrhosis. Still conscious, still attempting to write, he staggered toward the bathroom before collapsing. He was rushed to St. Anthony's Hospital, where doctors fought to stop the bleeding. But the damage was too deep, too long ignored. By the next morning, the father of the Beat generation was gone. He was only 47. Born in 1922, Kerouac became a cultural earthquake. His groundbreaking novel, On the Road, redefined American literature, capturing the restless spirit of post-war youth. He wrote with fire, urgency, and a freedom that inspired generations of artists, musicians, and wanderers. People didn't just read Kerouac, they lived him. His words became a lifestyle. But fame brought storms he could never escape. He felt misunderstood, attacked by critics, pressured by fans, and pursued by his own anxiety. Alcohol became his refuge, then his prison, and finally his executioner. When news of his death spread, the artistic world was stunned. Poets held vigils. Musicians dedicated songs. Followers of the Beat movement wept, knowing the man who taught them to chase freedom had died trapped inside his own body. What do you think, ladies and gentlemen? Was Kerouac destroyed by fame, by addiction, or by the weight of his own genius? Leave your thoughts in the comments below.
Garrincha, 1933 to 1983. Garrincha's final days were a heartbreaking unraveling of a man once celebrated as pure joy on the football field. In January 1983, after years of consuming staggering amounts of alcohol daily, he collapsed in Rio de Janeiro, confused, weak, and barely able to speak. His liver had reached its final stage of destruction. He was taken to a public hospital where doctors recognized the grim reality: advanced cirrhosis, irreversible damage, and multiple organ failure. Surrounded not by roaring crowds but by silence, the joy of the people slipped away. His death certificate was brutally simple: liver disease brought on by alcoholism. But who was Garrincha? Born in 1933 with physical deformities that should have prevented him from ever playing football, he instead became one of the greatest dribblers in the history of the sport. A two-time World Cup champion, he mesmerized defenders and audiences with movements that felt supernatural. Brazilians didn't just admire him, they adored him. When he touched the ball, stadiums erupted. He turned football into poetry. Yet his personal life was a storm. Poverty, fame, pressure, failed relationships, and chronic pain fed a lifelong dependence on alcohol. The world celebrated Garrincha, the legend, but Manuel dos Santos, the man, was often left alone with his demons. When he died, Brazil fell into mourning. Thousands attended his funeral, crying openly in the streets, knowing the country had lost a piece of its soul. What do you think, dear viewers? Was Garrincha's downfall inevitable, or could his genius have been saved? Leave your thoughts below.
William Holden, 1918 to 1981. William Holden's final night was a chilling reminder of how quickly alcohol can turn the familiar into fatal. On November 12, 1981, alone in his Santa Monica apartment, he had been drinking heavily when he stumbled, fell, and struck his head on a table. Dazed and bleeding, he never called for help. The wound continued to bleed slowly through the night. By the time anyone found him days later, the Oscar-winning actor who once commanded Hollywood's brightest stages had died alone on the floor. His death was ruled an accident, but alcohol had paved the path. Born in 1918, Holden became one of the most influential actors of Hollywood's golden age. His performances in Stalag 17, Sunset Boulevard, and Network showcased a rare combination of charisma, intensity, and emotional depth. He wasn't just a star, he was a force, shaping the identity of mid-century American cinema. Viewers saw him as rugged, honest, and endlessly compelling. Yet behind that charm lived a long battle with alcohol. Fame's pressure, Demanding roles and personal turbulence wore him down, and drinking became a constant companion. Friends worried, directors noticed, and Holden himself admitted he struggled to control it. The world was stunned when news of his lonely death broke. Fans mourned not only the loss of a legend, but the tragedy of how quietly his final hours had passed. Even Hollywood paused, shaken by how human, how vulnerable he truly was. What do you think, viewers? Do you believe Holden's career pressures pushed him deeper into addiction? Leave your thoughts below. Veronica Lake, 1922 to 1973. Veronica Lake's final chapter was a stark contrast to the dazzling image she once embodied on the silver screen. In July 1973, weakened by years of heavy drinking, she was admitted to a hospital in Vermont after experiencing severe stomach pain and fever. Doctors discovered acute hepatitis and advanced cirrhosis. Her liver could fight no longer. Even as medical teams tried to stabilize her, her condition deteriorated rapidly. Alone, far from the Hollywood lights that once celebrated her, Veronica Lake took her final breath at just 50 years old. Alcohol had slowly eroded the life of a woman who once defined an era. Born in 1922, Lake burst onto the scene in the 1940s with her iconic peekaboo hairstyle and unforgettable presence in films like Sullivan's Travels and This Gun for Hire. Her mysterious beauty and cool charm made her one of Hollywood's most recognizable stars. She shaped fashion trends, inspired wartime hairstyles, and left an impact that still echoes in cinema history. But her life behind the camera was filled with storms. Broken marriages, financial hardships, mental health struggles, and the volatile relationship with fame. As roles disappeared and the industry shifted, alcohol became both her escape and her downfall. When news of her death emerged, fans were stunned. Many had not known how quietly her life had faded, how far she had drifted from the world that once adored her. What do you think, dear viewers? Was Veronica Lake failed by Hollywood, or was she simply overwhelmed by life's pressures? Leave your thoughts below. Townes Van Zandt, 1944 through 1997. Townes Van Zandt's final hours were quiet, chaotic, and heartbreakingly ordinary for a man whose genius was always shadowed by self-destruction. On January 1, 1997, after decades of heavy drinking, his weakened heart could no longer withstand the damage alcohol had carved into his body. He collapsed at home in Tennessee after a series of alcohol-related health crises. Though those around him tried to revive him, his heartbeat faded, and by the time medical help arrived, the poet of Americana music was gone. The official cause was cardiac arrhythmia brought on by long-term alcohol abuse. Born in 1944, Van Zandt was a songwriter unlike any other. Raw, haunting, and stunningly honest. His compositions like Poncho and Lefty and If I Needed You became timeless treasures, covered by country legends and admired by musicians across generations. He was often called a songwriter, the kind of artist whose words cut straight into the soul. Yet, his life was marked by darkness. Depression, addiction, and personal turmoil followed him everywhere. Friends loved him deeply, but feared for him constantly. His brilliance and his pain were inseparable, and alcohol became both his muse and his undoing. When news of his death spread, the music world grieved intensely. Artists who had studied his style, borrowed his phrasing, and admired his vulnerability poured out tributes. They knew they had lost a quiet giant. What do you think, dear viewers? Do you believe Townes Van Zandt's sorrow fueled his genius, or did it rob him of the life he deserved? Leave your thoughts below. F. Scott Fitzgerald, 1896 to 1940. F. Scott Fitzgerald's final moments were tragically mundane for a man whose writing defined the glittering illusions of the Jazz Age. On December 21, 1940, while living in Hollywood and struggling through yet another attempt to rebuild his life, he suddenly felt dizzy and clutched his chest. Moments later, he collapsed onto the living room floor of his companion, Sheila Graham. Paramedics could do nothing. His heart had failed.
The autopsy revealed the truth. Years of excessive drinking had caused a severe coronary arterial sclerosis. The man who chronicled the destructive glamour of the Roaring Twenties had, in the end, been destroyed by the same shadows he once exposed. Born in 1896, Fitzgerald became one of America's greatest novelists. The Great Gatsby stands as a pillar of modern literature, a haunting portrait of ambition, longing, and the cost of chasing illusions. His poetic prose, sharp observations, and deep emotional storytelling reshaped 20th century fiction. Even during his Hollywood years, when work was scarce and life was turbulent, his talent never faded. Yet, his personal life was a storm. His marriage to Zelda was riddled with mental illness, financial collapse, and emotional battles. Fame slipped away, critics dismissed him, Hollywood used him. And through it all, alcohol became both his comfort and his curse. When he died, the literary world barely noticed. But in the decades that followed, his legacy soared. Today, he is a legend whose work remains immortal. What do you think, ladies and gentlemen? Was Fitzgerald a victim of his era, his marriage, or his addiction? Share your thoughts below.
Bix Beiderbecke's final days were the tragic unraveling of a prodigy pushed beyond human limits. In August 1931, after years of relentless touring, sleepless nights, and heavy drinking, his body finally collapsed inside his New York apartment. Neighbors reported hearing him struggling to breathe before he fell unconscious. By the time help arrived, it was too late. The 28-year-old jazz genius had died from lobar pneumonia, made far more severe by chronic alcoholism. The coroner's report confirmed what friends already feared. His body had been weakened beyond repair. Born in 1903, Beiderbecke was one of early jazz's brightest flames. His cornet playing was unlike anything the world had heard, warm, introspective, and emotionally rich. Pieces like In a Mist and his recordings with the Wolverines cemented him as a pioneer whose sounds shaped the evolution of American music. Musicians who heard him play called him a revelation. Many considered him years ahead of his time. Yet, behind the brilliance lived a man tormented by pressure. He was painfully shy, overwhelmed by constant travel, and haunted by the demands of a rapidly changing jazz scene. Alcohol became the only escape he could find, numbing the stress, but slowly destroying his health. When news of his death spread, the jazz world mourned as though a star had fallen from the sky. His fellow musicians spoke of him with a mixture of awe and heartbreak, knowing the world had lost an artist who never reached the full height of his potential. What do you think, dear viewers? Was Bix a victim of fame or of a world that didn't understand his sensitivity? Leave your thoughts below. W.C. Fields, 1880 to 1946. W.C. Fields' final days were marked by the very force he had long used as material for humor. In December 1946, after decades of chronic drinking, he suffered a severe gastric hemorrhage. The bleeding was unstoppable. Though doctors attempted to stabilize him, his organs were too weakened by years of alcohol abuse. On Christmas Day, the legendary comedian who made millions laugh slipped away in a hospital room in California. The world lost a master of wit, irony, and razor-sharp comedic timing, all to a battle he could never win. Born in 1880, Fields rose from poverty to become one of Hollywood's most distinctive comedic voices. His performances in It's a Gift, The Bank-a-Dick, and numerous vaudeville acts captured an unforgettable persona. Grumpy, sarcastic, world-weary, yet irresistibly funny. He wasn't just an actor, he was a pioneer of American comedy, shaping the sarcastic, deadpan style that influenced generations of performers. But behind the humor was a man carrying deep emotional scars. His childhood was turbulent, marked by hardship and instability.
Fame brought new pressures, studio conflicts, public scrutiny, and personal loneliness. Alcohol became his constant companion, woven into his persona on and off the screen. What audiences saw as a funny exaggeration was in truth an echo of real pain. When news of his death broke, Hollywood mourned loudly. Colleagues remembered him as brilliant, difficult, and irreplaceable, a man whose humor masked a lifetime of struggle. What do you think, dear viewers? Was W.C. Fields consumed by his own comedic image or by the burdens he carried privately? Leave your thoughts below. Sinclair Lewis, 1885 to 1951. Sinclair Lewis's final day was a quiet tragedy, one that mirrored the inner battles he had fought for decades. In January 1951, while traveling in Rome, his body finally collapsed under the weight of long-term alcoholism. After years of drinking that had steadily weakened his heart, he suffered a massive alcohol-induced heart attack. He was taken to the clinic of La Concepcion, but the damage was irreversible. Just like that, the first American to ever win the Nobel Prize in Literature was gone, far from home and far from the literary world he had transformed. Born in 1885, Lewis became one of the most influential voices in American literature. His novels, Main Street, Babbitt, and Arrowsmith, pierced through societal hypocrisy with brutal honesty and unmatched insight. He gave America a mirror, one that reflected its ambitions, its flaws, and its contradictions. When he won the Nobel Prize in 1930, he made history, proving that American literature had a place on the global stage. But brilliance didn't protect him from the storms of his own mind. Success brought pressure, criticism, and expectations that weighed heavily on him. His marriages fractured, his friendships suffered, and alcohol soon became the anchor he clung to, even as it pulled him under. When word of his death reached the United States, readers and writers mourned deeply. They knew they had lost a fearless critic of society, a man whose words shaped national conversations. What do you think, dear viewers? Did Sinclair Lewis's uncompromising honesty help him or isolate him? Leave your thoughts below. Clyde McPhatter's final days were a devastating descent into isolation and illness. In June 2022, after years of relentless alcohol abuse, he collapsed in his New York apartment. His liver, heart, and kidneys had all suffered extensive damage, and the cumulative strain finally pushed his body beyond recovery. By the time help arrived, the once golden voice of early R&B was gone. He was only 39. The official cause was the tragic combination of organ failures brought on by chronic alcoholism, an ending far removed from the spotlight that once embraced him. Born in 1932, McPhatter was one of the most important figures in the evolution of American music. As the lead tenor of the Drifters and later as a solo artist, he delivered hits that shaped the future of soul and R&B. His soaring, emotional voice influenced legends like Smokey Robinson, Sam Cooke, and countless others. Songs such as Money Honey and A Lover's Question remain timeless, echoing the brilliance of a man who changed the sound of an entire generation. But behind the music was a life marked by personal storms. Constant touring, financial disputes, emotional turmoil, and the crushing pressure of fame left him vulnerable. Alcohol, which once offered comfort, quickly became a destructive force. It isolated him from friends, family, and opportunities, leaving him alone at the end. Fans and musicians mourned deeply when news of his death spread. They understood that the world had lost a foundational voice, one whose influence still resonates today. What do you think, dear viewers? Was Clyde McPhatter's talent overshadowed by the era he lived in, or by the demons he carried? Leave your thoughts below. Michael Clarke, 1946 to 1993. Michael Clarke's final moments were a painful reminder of how a lifelong struggle with alcohol can silence even the most vibrant creative spirits. In December 1993, after years of drinking that had steadily weakened his liver, he suffered a severe episode of liver failure.
He collapsed in his home in California and was rushed to the hospital, but his organs were too damaged to recover. The drummer who once powered some of the most influential sounds in American rock never regained consciousness. He was only 47 years old. Doctors confirmed what those close to him already feared. Chronic alcoholism had finally taken its toll. Born in 1946, Michael Clarke became famous as the drummer of the Byrds, a band that reshaped American music in the 1960s. Though he had no formal training, his distinctive style helped define the rhythm of classics like Mr. Tambourine Man and Turn, Turn, Turn. He was part of a musical revolution that blended folk, rock, and psychedelic influences, leaving an imprint that musicians still study today. His spontaneity, energy, and instinctive feel for rhythm made him unforgettable. But behind the success was a life filled with turbulence. The pressures of sudden fame, growing tensions within the band, and an unpredictable lifestyle pushed them toward alcohol once again and again. Over time, his drinking escalated, damaging his relationships, his health, and ultimately his life. When news of his passing reached fans, the reaction was one of deep sadness. The music world mourned not only the loss of a talented drummer, but the loss of a man whose contributions helped shape modern rock. What do you think, dear viewers? Was Michael Clarke a victim of the music industry's chaos or of his own inner battles? Leave your thoughts below.
Ladies and gentlemen, these 13 stars may have left this world, but the echoes of their lives still linger in our memories. Each one carried extraordinary talent, voices that shaped music, words that transformed literature, performances that defined entire generations. Yet behind their brilliance were silent battles the public never truly saw. Alcohol didn't just take their lives suddenly, it slowly dimmed the light they gave to the world. But despite their hardships, their legacies endure. Their stories remind us that even the brightest icons walk a fragile line between glory and pain. Do you remember moments or memories of these legends that we haven't mentioned today? Share your thoughts in the comments below.